Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. Welcome to the 332nd episode of the podcast, and a special welcome if you are a new part of the Casting Across audience. And I'm very confident some of you are new, and here's the reason why. This week, in the week of the middle of March 2025, was the most trafficked week of Casting Across in history. And I don't know why. I mean, I'm not going to ask too many questions. I'm not going to try to fix a problem that isn't a problem. But we're talking about not just double, triple, quadruple, but like 10 times my normal website traffic, which is fantastic. I'm not going to complain at all. But I see that there's a lot of people that have subscribed. A lot of people that have subscribed to the website, and you can do that by going to castingacross.com, and on the sidebar of the desktop or below the articles on the mobile, there's a place to put in your email and hit subscribe. You do that, you get one email a week, and that has a link to both of the articles that came out and then a link to this podcast. But a lot of the folks that are listening to the podcast are probably subscribed in your favorite podcast catcher, iTunes, Spotify, whatever it may be. Just go ahead and subscribe. I'm not going to spam you. You get one podcast a week, you get one email a week. That is it. Well, I am, again, just really pleased to have more folks reading and more folks listening. And so, again, welcome if you are new. And we're going to talk about the article that got you here, the article that got such amazing results of folks reading and commenting and subscribing. And it was an article called There's No Trout There. There's No Trout There. And I guess instead of explaining it in 5 minutes, I'll read it because it's only 500 words long. So you're going to get the article in my voice. Actually, and I have to do another voice because it's a interlocutor that's part of it. So we'll go right into it. Ain't no fish in there. I'm confident that by fish, he meant trout, because there was, without a doubt, fish in this creek. Suckers fin in the clear pools. Dace chased little olives and midges. Suckers and dace are certainly fish. But few people with full vests and fancy fly rods are actively looking for suckers. Few folks with worm buckets and cane poles are looking for suckers for that matter. Well, that may be, I said, but I'm going to give it a whirl and see if I can find anything swimming around. He eyed me suspiciously. I imagine he was considering what kind of nefarious or seedy deeds I was actually planning, such that I'd put together an intricate ruse of fly fishing for trout in a stream that he knew held no trout. For all he knew, I was going to go and get high. Or worse, that I was a fed. Why don't you try Spring Creek? He asked with equal parts benevolence and apprehension. They got that whole fly fishing only section. You got to throw 'em back and everything. It was clear that he assumed I was a little nuts and was as concerned with his own well-being as a local as he was for mine as a misguided and potentially misanthropic actor. And he was right, about Spring Creek at least. It was quite the trout stream. The catch and release, fly fishing only stretch was known for the big, wary rainbows and browns. Anglers came from hours away to show up early, secure a spot, and drift minuscule midges in front of the same selective fish for the better part of a whole day. It does hold a certain allure, I admit, but it isn't exactly the kind of explorative, wild fishing that scratches a pioneer itch that we all need to scratch from time to time. Scratching is a practice best done with some foresight, and this satisfying scrape was the result of some empirical research, old fisheries reports, watershed analysis, and the optimism that only wild trout aficionados can muster up all played an important role. Essentially, the state had said there were fish there at one point in the past. The creek was accessible to trout through connected bodies of water, and I have an unyielding hope that some trout cling to even the most precarious ecological crevices. Some of these expeditions result in success. Often, that means a small wild trout. Infrequently, something truly large and surprising comes to net. The most common outcome is nothing, or one of the many species that are fine in their own right, but not trout when trout is what you're after. Yet, like the folks who keep pulling the slot machine arm or scratching ticket after ticket, the intermittent positive reinforcement keeps me coming back. There's something to be said for tricking the overfished, fished-over specimens in the special regulation section. But the upside of catching fish where there's, quote, no fish here is a real intoxicating feeling. Yeah, I said to him as I looked up from tying on a fly. I might head over there this afternoon, but I just want to poke around here for a bit first. Stay away from the crowds, you know. All right. Well, you won't have any competition from me. There's no trout there. And if you do catch something, it'll be a miracle. Well, I'll take that. And I've taken that a lot of times in my life, a lot of times in my fishing. And so, again, this was an actual interaction I had with somebody on a small stream. I believe it was in Maryland. It was right at the Maryland-Pennsylvania border, but I believe we were actually in Maryland when I had this exact interchange. And this was something I still do today, but this was the kind of thing that really captured my interest as a young angler. When I was first going out and exploring, because my you know, fly fishing chops were honed on some of the most popular catch and release streams in South Central Pennsylvania, Central Maryland, and Northern Virginia, down in the Shenandoahs. This is where I spent all of my time. And although I still go back to these streams, I still go back to these places where I know I am going to be able to cast minute midges to very discerning trout any day of the year, and I have a lot of fun doing it. That was something that I realized after reading and after kind of being exposed to the greater picture of fly fishing. I knew that there was something slightly artificial about that. Now, even saying that, that sounds like a bit of a pejorative way to talk about a kind of fly fishing that I really, really enjoy. But it's not the same experience as you have when you're in wilderness. I mean, if you can drive up to a trout stream and you can just wade in and make a cast and there's a fish there, then it's not the same thing as getting your feet dirty, maybe even getting your fingers dirty by flipping through the Delorme Atlas or scrolling in your phone and trying to find where there's more water. And generally what happens when you get into that situation is you're ticking up a few boxes that are really the kind of things that get us into fly fishing in the first place. It is that solitude. You're not going to have solitude on the most famous streams around this entire world. And if you do, it's either because something else is happening, Super Bowl. I used to always go fly fishing for steelhead up in northwestern Pennsylvania when the Steelers were in the playoffs. I love football, but I also really enjoyed having that water to myself. And again, you're saying, hey, you're talking about artificial fishing and you're fishing for steelhead in Pennsylvania. Well, again, it's all shades of the same conversation. Or you're paying big money to have access to whether it be an English chalk stream or private water out west, or even private water here on the East Coast. And you get that solitude, you get that privacy when you go find water. You go find some place where you can effectively be by yourself. You get away from the crowds. And then, two, you're also finding a fish that might be more natural. So one of the things that is artificial is stocked fish. One of my most popular podcasts, if you go back years and years, I'll probably revisit this sometime in the future because it was a long time ago. I mean, we're at episode 332. This might have been episode 30, maybe even 3. I don't remember. But talking about the various pros and cons of stocked, wild, and native fish and how you encounter them. But for a lot of folks who fish a lot or have a very narrow focus in their fly fishing, finding those wild, so fish that are stream bred and stream raised, or native fish that have been there since time immemorial, finding those fish holds a little extra something over finding a fish that was thrown in at 8 inches, or maybe was even thrown in there as a fingerling and grew. Again, not casting any sort of shade, as they say, at those fish, but there is something different. I mean, I will, and the analogy that I used back when I talked about stocked and wild native fish, I'll eat a McDonald's burger. I'm not too good for that, but I also really enjoy a high-end burger from a steakhouse. They both have their pros, they both have their cons. So all that to say, the real high-end burger is what you find when you go out and find fish that maybe aren't in a place where there's a kiosk saying, here's where the fish are, where you find a fish in a place where there maybe aren't even trails. And I alluded to 3 things in that article that are worth doing to go and find those fish. So here's the meat of it. I've been giving an apology for this kind of fishing, which I really don't think I need to convince you. I mean, even if you're a new angler, there's a very good chance that if you enjoy the outdoors, then this kind of fishing, you understand it probably has a higher risk and a lower yield, but there's a lot of fun that goes into it. And here, another anecdote before I get to these 3 pieces of advice. I've certainly written about it at some point in the past, but I did this where I stalked a fish and I found a stream and I found a pool that was deep enough to hold trout. And I planned this whole thing out and it took multiple trips and some scouting and the whole 9 yards. And I made a beautiful cast, and what came up but a 6-inch bluegill. Thinking, what in the world is bluegill doing in this stream? And again, if it was a 6-inch brook trout, I'm sure I would have been happier. But looking back on it, it was just hilarious. And, I didn't lose anything. It was still an adventure, maybe a lowercase a adventure, but still an adventure. Anyway, back to those three things. The first thing you can find is historical data. Historical data. So where do you find this? This is where having access to paper information is really, really valuable. So your local library is a great resource. Maybe even your local fly shop is a great resource where they have old Fish and Game digests. I think that's what they're called here in New Hampshire, like New Hampshire Fish and Game Digest, that list the special regulations and list the stocking and list all of that information. You can certainly find it online too, but one of the things that happens is that information that is dynamic, so how regulations change, how waters that are regulated in different ways change from year to year, they'll usually just throw the newer version on top of the old version, or the old URL will be dead. And again, we're talking about going back maybe 20, 25 years. And at that point, unless that state agency went and archived some of their old print files, you're not going to be able to find them anyway. So I like going to, again, the library is a great resource, and looking and trying to find, whether it be, again, from the Fish and Game, through rod and gun clubs, or even through books that talk about fishing. So this is another great resource. I talk about guidebooks a lot, how great they are, and how a new guidebook will come out, whether it be from the same publisher or from a different publisher, every 5 or 10 years for an area. But those old ones still have value, even though the information is outdated in one respect. That is to say, you shouldn't use that data to fish today. You should look at the updated one because of, waters change, fisheries change, regulations change, even just parking lots change, and stream access laws change. But you can look at those older books and get an idea of where the fish were. Great example. There was a Pennsylvania Spring Creek that has just disappeared from like all the literature. But in my guidebooks that are like 20 years old, people talk about it. And I went there and I caught trout. I'm not sure what happened. I wasn't poaching. I wasn't trespassing. It just, I think maybe it lost its luster. It's definitely a small little ditch, but there's fish there. And not big fish, but it doesn't, it kind of pales in comparison. So I think, I can only assume that maybe the state just stopped throwing money at it and it just continues to do its own thing. I'm sure I'm not the only person that knows about it, but when I found it, it was not being talked about in the most recent guidebooks. So find that historical data. That's the first piece of advice. The second one is follow maps. Follow maps. One of the things I like doing with my kids is we'll get on a map of someplace that we are. So a great example is where my in-laws live down in Virginia. And there's a little creek that empties into a little Army Corps of Engineers basin behind their house that we fish in. And fantastic. And what we've done before is we've said, all right, well, here's the pond behind Grandma and Papa's house. Where does that pond empty into? Well, it empties into this creek. What does that do? It goes into this river. When it goes into this river, and this river ends up going into the James, flowing through Richmond, and emptying out into the bay and then into the ocean. And so this was a really cool thing for my kids to see how watersheds work. But then it's also getting you to think about watersheds from a bigger picture. So you can do this for wherever you live, and whatever big trout river that that you go and fish, there's a very good chance it's not simply a channel. It's not simply a straight line from, some headwaters up in the mountains straight to the ocean, but there's countless tributaries and feeders. And guess what? Fish don't look at a road sign saying, oh, now you're entering, Little Creek. You're on Big River. Here is where Little Creek is. I'm going to stay out. If anything, seasonally or based on flow and temperature, they're going to use these. Virtually every fish is going to use these. Another example, this is a podcast episode chock full of anecdotes. There is the warmest, muddiest crawfish and leech-filled creek that you can think of in Pennsylvania. And I would fish it for smallmouth. And it was a fantastic creek for fishing smallmouth, but it was just warm. I mean, it felt like it was warm in early spring. But in the wintertime, the trout that lived in the smaller creeks would drop down in there because there was all that food. And so although it only maintained trout for a small portion of the year, they were in there, and guess what they would do? They would move around. I knew guys that would catch big trout in one small creek in one year, throw the thing back, and then the next year catch the same fish because they either, they paid attention, they took pictures in a different creek separated by, the better part of a quarter mile. Well, why is that? That fish dropped into the main stem, moved around, and then whether because it had to or it simply wanted to, it just moved into a different creek. So fish, again, are no respecters of the artificial lines that we put on the map. They will move around. And so trying to find, there's definitely fish in this creek. Maybe this is a creek that is stocked by somebody. Another example, I caught a rainbow in a creek that nobody has any record of there being rainbow stocked, but I went and found that about 300 yards upstream, there was a guy who had a little kind of spring that ran through his property, and come to find out he threw some rainbows in there. Again, this was a brown trout fishery, and it wasn't really even a wild brown trout fishery. It was just kind of a put and take brown trout fishery. But I caught this rainbow far from where this guy had thrown this rainbow, but it made its way down and up into a little another creek. And so the same principle can hold true, and native fish will do this also. Brook trout can do this, and that's where you will see when you have hurricanes, when you have terrible ecological situations that happen in the Blue Ridge and the Appalachian Mountains, and a fishery seems to be wiped out, where fish will reestablish themselves. Some of it is because they can take refuge. Some of it is because fish will move from one waterway to another, assuming there's no man-made obstacles or no natural obstacles, no big waterfalls, and also like no bad culverts and things like that. So paying attention to where fish are and where fish can maybe be is a really, really important way to find yourself looking for trout where there maybe shouldn't be trout from all objective perspectives. So first bit of advice was find the historical data. Secondly, do a little bit of watershed analysis. And the third one is to have that optimism and go and fish. Like I said, I thought I was going to catch a 12-inch brook trout, but ended up being a 6-inch bluegill. It is what it is. Go out there, get your feet wet. There was a creek that I knew that historically held some rainbow trout, and this was in Northern Virginia years and years and years ago. And they had supposedly had a self-sustaining population. And so I hiked and hiked and hiked and fished the mouth of the creek, nothing. Came back another time, fished a couple 100 yards up into it, nothing. Next time, guess what? Caught a rainbow trout. It wasn't big, but it was really exciting for me. Just because it was a fish where there shouldn't be fish, a fish where there was no fish there for all intents and purposes. And so going up and finding that fish was awesome. And it took a couple of trips. And, I fished for carp and I fished for smallmouth as I was doing it. As I did this, I was walking up this warm river, and I had my 6-weight rigged with a popper. And then I had my little 3-weight strapped to my side that I was waiting to fish for those trout when I finally got to it. It's, 2 for 1. It was a great situation. But again, what are you doing? You're paying attention to things. You are, walking the stream, looking for signs, seeing if you can find what is in there. And that is not a fruitless exercise. There's a lot of fun that comes with it. And when you do find that fish, I mean, some of the size of the trout that I've pulled out of little spring creek ditches in, again, kind of that mid-Atlantic area, it's just fantastic. I mean, whether, upwards of 18 inches. I know that's not the biggest trout in the world, but when you're catching it out of a stream that's maybe 18 inches wide and weed choked, that to me is as exciting. It's more exciting than catching the 18-incher on the Delaware. It's more exciting probably than catching like that, 20-incher in the stock pond, right? It is a value judgment that we each make ourselves. It's a very subjective thing, but for me, getting the good sized fish in the unlikely place has more value than catching the good-sized fish in the place where you kind of expect to catch good-sized fish. Now, again, not going to balk at catching the 18-inch brown on the Delaware, but there's something special about that 18-inch brown on that little unnamed trickle that I tracked down, and probably got all sorts of ticks and poison ivy and ruined some gear as I crawled to try to make my cast and have that one shot on that fish that was a little bit more selective, and I'm definitely aware of his surroundings. So that's kind of the mentality behind me writing There's No Trout There. And so if you found casting across through the article, welcome. This is the kind of stuff I do. This is the kind of content that gets put out twice a week on the website and once a week here on the podcast. If you have a story that you would like to share with me, let me know. Matthew at castingacross.com. One of the things I'll always do is get back to you, assuming my spam filter doesn't think that your email address is sketchy. And secondly, I always like to share stuff that readers and listeners send in. Every 10 episodes, I do that. So let me know. Again, Matthew at castingacross.com. This week on Casting Across, I just talked about the first article that came out. There's no trout there. If you haven't read it, then I'm sure there's hundreds of thousands of people that haven't, but you're one of them. You definitely go and read it. But you heard me say it. But anyway, go check it out. Wednesday's article was really exciting. It's called Video. Dozens of fly tying experts, one book. And here I do another installment in my YouTube book review series. And this time it's Tying Euro Nymphs by Tim Camisa. Actually, the full title, Tying Euro Nymphs and Other Competition Favorites. And you might say, I don't like using Euro nymphing tactics. It doesn't feel like fly fishing to me. Okay, that's fine. It's not my preferred way of fly fishing either. However, I do it from time to time. But what you get from this book is the kind of philosophy that is used by the folks that are building nymphs to get down deep, get down in front of fish, and lose nymphs. And why does that matter? Well, one, down deep in front of fish is where you want to catch fish. Losing nymphs is kind of what you have to do if you're going to be fishing on the bottom. But also, they want flies that are disposable in a sense, not in a reckless, wasteful sense, but they want to be able to tie a dozen in less than an hour. And if you are a mediocre fly tyer, or if you are somebody who can't, afford to buy dozens of flies because you're going to be losing dozens of flies because you're fishing on the bottom, then the flies that Tim talks about are the kind of flies that, yes, they do win competitions. They do, fill up the boxes of Euro nymphers. But these are the kind of flies that you can tie. I'm confident you can tie them, even if you are a moderate to intermediate fly tyer. Why? Because I am a moderate to intermediate fly tyer, and I can tie these flies. But then there's so much more information, and I don't want to spoil it. At least I don't want to spoil my video. So go check that out. You can watch it on Casting Across, or you can head over to YouTube. And hey, subscribe to me on YouTube there, and you can get those videos when they come out every week. This week's recommendation on the podcast is a fly rod. I feel like it's been a long time since I've recommended a fly rod, but today I am recommending the Redington EDC, which is the everyday carry. I like Redington gear. I like Redington gear because, generally speaking, I find that it is of a quality that matches stuff that's about 25 to 30% more. That's just my humble opinion. I really like their butter stick for the fiberglass application, and I really like their field kits for somebody who's getting involved in fly fishing who wants to kind of spend their money on one thing and get everything they need to actually fish and fish well, not just to have some beginner gear. But the EDC, I cast this rod for the first time at the fly fishing show this year, and I loved it. I cast the 9-foot 5-weight and actually bought the 9.5-foot 5-weight with the intention of this being my canoe rod for trout. To have a little bit more length so I can pull up line off the water and maybe haul a little bit faster. It is a wonderful fly rod. Retails for $329 to $349, depending on if you get a lighter or a heavier rod. But again, I can speak for the trout application sizes. Great crisp action, a real dream to roll cast, but it's not so fast that you're going to feel like you are losing sensitivity or losing finesse. This is definitely a great dry fly rod, but it also has what you need to roll over a nymph rig or throw a streamer. So just a great, again, they call it everyday carry because it really is a multi-purpose every situation rod. If you are in the market for something like that, or maybe you've been fishing like I've been talking about, the 7-foot 3-weight, but you want to have a nice all-around rod that you can fish streamers, nymphs, and dries, definitely check this rod out. I would say I'd compare it to rods that, again, cost maybe $150 more. So I really enjoy it, and I think that you should check it out at your local fly shop. Give it a cast. And of course, you can check out a link to where you can see it down at the show notes for this podcast page over at castingacross.com. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe to your favorite podcast app and rate the podcast on iTunes and Spotify. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week, the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.